The Galactic Council's grand amphitheater buzzed with anticipation as beings from across the known universe gathered for what they called justice. Towering Vorthic warriors stood alongside crystalline Etherians, while insectoid Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in approval. At the center of it all, a makeshift execution platform had been erected, its metallic surface gleaming under the harsh artificial lights that would broadcast this moment to billions of worlds. 20-3-year-old. Sarah Chun stood on that platform, her hands bound behind her back with quantum restraints that hummed with deadly energy. Her dark hair fell in disheveled strands across her face, but her eyes remained defiant, staring directly into the primary broadcast camera. She wore the simple gray uniform of a human diplomatic aide. Now torn and stained from her capture and imprisonment, the charges against her were severe by Galactic Council standards: espionage, theft of classified military intelligence, conspiracy against the established order. The evidence, they claimed, was irrefutable. Sarah had been caught accessing restricted files about the Council's military positions near human space, information that could have devastating consequences if it fell into the wrong hands. Council Prime Nexanador, a massive being whose species resembled a cross between a rhinoceros and a spider, approached the execution platform with ceremonial gravity. His multiple eyes focused on Sarah as he began reading the formal charges in the universal tongue that all civilized species were required to learn. His voice boomed across the amphitheater and through the quantum communication networks that carried this broadcast to every corner of known space. The accused stands, guilty of crimes against galactic security and peace. The Xanador intoned, his words causing ripples of approval throughout the assembled crowd. By unanimous decision of this council, the sentence is immediate termination, to serve as an example to any who would threaten the stability we have worked millennia to achieve. Sarah lifted her chin higher. When given the traditional opportunity to speak final words, her voice carried clearly through the amplification systems. My name is Sarah Chun. I am the daughter of Admiral Marcus Chun of the Human Colonial Fleet. I was not a spy. I was trying to warn my people about your planned invasion of our outer colonies. Everything I did was to protect innocent lives. Murmurs of dismissal rippled through the crowd. Humans were a young species, barely a century into their spacefaring existence. They controlled perhaps a dozen star systems on the very edge of known space, hardly worth the Council's serious attention. The idea that the mighty Galactic Council would concern itself with invading such an insignificant territory was, to most present, laughable. The condemned speaks lies to avoid responsibility, the Xanador declared. Humanity must learn its place in the galactic order. This execution will teach them that defiance brings only death. The execution device was a marvel of efficient engineering, designed by the Zephyrians for maximum psychological impact. It would disintegrate Sarah's molecular structure slowly, ensuring both pain and a clear visual demonstration of the Council's power. The process would take approximately 90 seconds and would be recorded in perfect detail for future reference and deterrent purposes. As the device powered up with an ominous whine, Sarah's thoughts turned to her father. Admiral Marcus Chun had been away on a deep space reconnaissance mission for the past 6 months, exploring potential colony sites beyond the established human territories. He had no idea that his daughter had volunteered for this diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council, believing it was a routine cultural exchange program. Sarah had discovered the invasion plans by accident while working as a cultural liaison. A careless Vorthak officer had left his personal datapad unattended, and curiosity had driven her to examine its contents. What she found had chilled her to the bone. Detailed military assessments of human colonies, tactical plans for orbital bombardments, projected casualty figures in the hundreds of millions. The Council viewed humanity as a potential threat that needed to be eliminated before it could develop into something more dangerous. Humans reproduced too quickly, adapted too easily to new environments, and showed a disturbing tendency toward technological innovation. Better to crush them now, while they remained weak and scattered across only a few systems. Sarah had tried to warn her, Government through official channels? But the Council's intelligence network was too thorough. They had intercepted her communications, captured her before she could leave Council space, and staged a quick trial that was more theater than justice. Now she would die as an example, and her people would remain unwarned until the invasion fleet arrived at their doorstep. The execution device reached full power, its energy field beginning to surround Sarah's body with crackling tendrils of destructive force. She felt the first tingles of molecular disruption beginning at her extremities, a sensation like being slowly dissolved in acid. The pain was immediate and intense, but she refused to give the Council the satisfaction of hearing her scream. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the primary camera, knowing that this broadcast was being transmitted across human space as well as the rest of the galaxy. Her people would see this. They would understand what it meant, even if she could not warn them of the coming invasion. Perhaps her death would serve as a rallying cry for resistance. When the attack finally came, the crowd watched in satisfied silence as the execution proceeded. To them, this was justice being served, a reminder of the natural order that placed the established galactic powers above upstart species like humanity. Some species had learned this lesson through diplomacy and gradual integration. Others required more dramatic instruction. As Sarah's body began to shimmer with the effects of molecular dissolution, emergency alarms suddenly began blaring throughout the Council station. Long-range sensors had detected something approaching at impossible speeds. Security officers rushed to their positions while Council members looked around in confusion. The sensor readings made no sense. The approaching object was massive, larger than any known ship class, and it was moving faster than physics should allow. More disturbing still, it was heading directly for the Council station with no signs of deceleration. The Xenodor paused the execution sequence, the energy field around Sarah flickering as power was diverted to defensive systems. The assembled crowd began to murmur nervously as security updates filtered through their communication devices. Whatever was coming, it would arrive in less than 7 minutes. Sarah, despite the pain coursing through her partially disrupted nervous system, managed to smile. She recognized those sensor readings. She had seen similar impossible readings before, during classified human military tests that officially did not exist. Her father was coming home early from his mission, and he was not arriving alone. Admiral Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of the HSV Retribution, a vessel that officially did not exist in any human fleet registry. 6 months of deep space reconnaissance had been cut short when his ship's quantum communication array intercepted the Council's execution broadcast. The moment he recognized his daughter on that platform, surrounded by the assembled might of galactic civilization, something fundamental had broken inside him. The Retribution was humanity's first and only prototype warship, built with technology reverse-engineered from a derelict alien vessel, discovered in the Kepler 442 system 3 years earlier. The original ship's builders remained unknown, but their technology was centuries beyond anything the current galactic powers possessed. Human engineers had spent those 3 years learning to understand and replicate systems that bent the laws of physics like suggestions rather than absolutes. "Admiral, we're approaching optimal firing range," reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the weapons station. Her voice carried the tight control of someone trying to maintain professional composure while watching a superior officer's daughter being murdered on live broadcast. "All experimental systems are online and responding normally." Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the main screen where the Council station grew larger with each passing second. The massive structure housed over 2 million beings from across the galaxy, a diplomatic and cultural center that represented everything the galactic community claimed to value about cooperation and justice. In 30 seconds, it would learn what human justice looked like when it was applied with extreme prejudice. "Time to intercept?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the cold precision that had made him one of humanity's most effective military commanders. 37 seconds, sir," replied his navigation officer. "Council defensive systems are powering up, but their weapons can't track us at this velocity." "They're firing blind?" The Retribution's experimental drive system allowed it to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, technically occupying multiple positions simultaneously, until the moment of weapon firing collapsed its probability wave into definitive reality. To outside observers, it appeared as though the ship was moving faster than light while somehow avoiding the relativistic effects that should have made such movement impossible. Energy beams from the Council's defensive platforms passed harmlessly through space, where the Retribution had been milliseconds before. The alien technology that powered their ship operated on principles that the galaxy's current inhabitants simply did not understand, making their defenses effectively useless against this unexpected assault. "Sir, receiving emergency communications from the Council station," reported the communications officer. "They're demanding we identify ourselves and state our intentions." "Put me through to all frequencies," Marcus ordered. "I want every being in that station to hear this." The communication channel opened, carrying his words not only to the Council station but to the billions of viewers watching the execution broadcast across known space. Marcus stepped forward, his weathered face illuminated by the bridge's tactical displays. "My name is Admiral Marcus Chun of the Human Colonial Fleet. The young woman you are torturing to death on live broadcast is my daughter. She committed no crime except trying to warn her people about your planned genocide. You have 30 seconds to release her and surrender for trial under human jurisdiction." The response from Council Prime Lexanador came immediately, transmitted on all frequencies with the full authority of galactic law behind it. "This is Council space, human. You have no authority here. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of your aggression against legitimate galactic authority." Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "The consequence of my aggression is that you all die. The consequence of your aggression is that humanity declares war on the Galactic Council and everything it represents. Choose wisely." On the execution platform, Sarah felt the molecular disintegration field flicker and fade as power was diverted to defensive systems. The relief from the pain was immediate, though the damage already done to her nervous system left her shaking and disoriented. She could see the confusion spreading through the amphitheater as beings who had never experienced a serious threat to their security suddenly found themselves facing something their weapons could not touch. "This is insanity." The Xanador broadcast to the approaching ship. "One vessel cannot threaten a station with the defensive capabilities of a small fleet. Surrender now, and we will allow your crew to live as prisoners of war." The response came not in words but in action. The Retribution's main weapon system engaged for the first time in actual combat, channeling the exotic energy principles that humanity barely understood into a focused beam of pure destruction. The weapon did not fire energy or projectiles in any conventional sense. Instead, it temporarily altered the fundamental constants of physics in a targeted area, causing matter to simply cease existing in any recognizable form. 3 of the Council's most heavily armed defensive platforms vanished without explosion or debris. They simply stopped being, leaving empty space where megatons of metal and advanced technology had existed moments before. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any explosion could have been. "Fascinating technology," Marcus said over the open channel, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. "We found it on a ship that had been drifting dead in space for approximately 50,000 years. The original builders apparently had some strong opinions about species that executed children for trying to prevent genocides." Panic began to spread through the Council station as beings who had lived their entire lives in the safety of established galactic order suddenly confronted something that could erase their greatest achievements without effort. Emergency evacuation procedures began activating as non-essential personnel rushed toward escape pods and transport ships. "You cannot threaten the legitimate authority of this council," the Xanador transmitted, though his voice now carried undertones of uncertainty. "We represent the will of thousands of species across the galaxy. Attack us, and you declare war on civilized space itself." "Actually," Marcus replied, I think you'll find that civilized space is about to declare war on you. Computer, transmit the intelligence package that Sarah died trying to deliver. Across the galaxy, communication networks suddenly flooded with detailed military plans, casualty projections, and strategic assessments that painted a clear picture of the Council's intended genocide against humanity. The evidence was irrefutable, documented in the Council's own words and carrying the authentication codes that proved its authenticity. Species that had been watching what they thought was a legitimate execution suddenly found themselves witnesses to something far more sinister. The narrative began shifting as the truth spread through quantum communication networks faster than the Council's damage control efforts could contain it. Sarah, still bound on the execution platform but now forgotten as more pressing concerns demanded attention, managed to stand despite her injuries. The molecular disruption had damaged her nervous system, but her mind remained clear. She could see her father's ship through the station's transparent aluminum viewports. A sleek predator hanging in space like humanity's sword of judgment. The next communication came from an unexpected source. The crystalline Etherians, known throughout the galaxy for their rigid adherence to ethical principles, broadcast their own message on all frequencies. Their representative's harmonic voice carried a tone of absolute moral authority. The Galactic Council stands accused of planning genocide against a sapient species. This evidence demands immediate investigation. We withdraw our support from these proceedings and call for the establishment of an independent tribunal to examine these charges. Other voices began joining the Etherian declaration. Species that had been silent allies of the Council's authority suddenly found their moral foundations challenged by the evidence of planned genocide. The political unity that had made the Council's power absolute for millennia began fracturing in real time. Marcus watched the political collapse with grim satisfaction. His daughter had succeeded in her mission after all, though not in the way anyone had expected. The truth was spreading faster than the Council could suppress it, and the galaxy was learning what happened when you threatened humanity's children. The Council Station's main amphitheater had transformed from a place of ceremonial justice into a scene of barely controlled chaos. Beings who had arrived to witness the execution of a human spy now found themselves trapped in the middle of a diplomatic catastrophe that threatened to tear apart the foundations of galactic civilization. Council Prime. The Xenador stood frozen on the execution platform, his multiple eyes darting between the bound human female who should have been dead by now and the viewports that showed the impossible human warship hanging in space like a promised apocalypse. The political calculations that had guided his species to prominence within the Council hierarchy suddenly seemed inadequate for dealing with this unprecedented situation. Old defensive platforms. Target the human vessel, he commanded through his personal communication implant. Full bombardment pattern. Destroy it before it can cause further damage. The response from his military coordinator was not what he expected. Sir, we cannot achieve target lock. The vessel appears to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Our targeting computers cannot process the sensor readings. Sarah. Chun watched the confusion spreading through the amphitheater with growing satisfaction despite the pain that continued to rack her nervous system. The molecular disintegration device had damaged her motor functions, leaving her shaking and unsteady, but her mind remained sharp enough to appreciate the irony of her situation. She had volunteered for this mission hoping to gather evidence of Council military preparations. Instead, she had become the catalyst for something far more significant. Release the human prisoner. Admiral Chone's voice cut through the station's communication systems with Arctic authority. You have 15 seconds to comply before I demonstrate why humanity spent 3 years reverse engineering technology that your greatest scientists cannot even comprehend. The Xenador's response carried all the diplomatic authority of his position. We do not negotiate with terrorists, human. Your daughter is a convicted criminal who will face justice according to galactic law. Galactic law, Marcus repeated, his tone suggesting he found the concept amusing. The same galactic law that planned to exterminate my entire species based on the fear that we might someday become inconvenient competitors. Computer, display tactical analysis for the assembled delegates. Holographic projectors throughout the amphitheater activated without authorization from Council security systems, apparently hacked by the human ship's advanced technology. The displays showed detailed schematics of the Council's military assets, complete with capability assessments and vulnerability analyses that were far more accurate than anything in the Council's own classified databases. Your most powerful warships achieve maximum velocities of approximately 0.7 light speed, the Admiral's voice continued as the technical data scrolled past horrified Council military officers. Your defensive shields can withstand approximately 4.3 terajoules of focused energy before catastrophic failure. Your quantum communication networks operate on encryption, protocols that my ship's computer cracked in approximately 6 minutes. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. If humanity possessed such detailed intelligence about Council military capabilities, it suggested surveillance and infiltration operations that had been running for years without detection. Everything they thought they knew about human technological limitations was apparently wrong. Impossible, transmitted the Vorthic military representative. Our intelligence services have monitored human development closely. Your species lacks the technological foundation for such capabilities. Admiral Chun's laugh carried no humor. Your intelligence services monitored what we allowed them to see. Did you really think a species capable of faster than light travel would develop only the technologies you considered acceptable? We learned very quickly that survival in this galaxy required being underestimated by our potential enemies. Sarah felt the quantum restraints around her wrists suddenly deactivate, their control systems apparently overridden by her father's ship. She remained on the platform despite her freedom, knowing that any sudden movement might trigger a catastrophic escalation of violence. Around her, Council security forces aimed their weapons in her direction, while trying to track the positions of Admiral Qian's vessel on their increasingly useless sensor displays. The prisoner will remain in custody, the Xanador announced, though his voice now carried undertones of desperation. Any attempt to retrieve her will be considered an act of war against legitimate galactic authority. It's already an act of war, Admiral Chun replied. The question is whether you prefer a war that ends with your surrender and trial for attempted genocide, or a war that ends with the complete destruction of every Council installation in known space. The quantum communication networks that connected the galaxy suddenly erupted with emergency transmissions as the intelligence data continued spreading beyond the Council's ability to contain it. Species that had been loyal Council members for centuries found themselves confronting evidence that their government had been planning aggressive wars, while publicly maintaining policies of peace and cooperation. The Zephyrian delegate, her insectoid features rigid with shock, transmitted her own message on the diplomatic frequency. These documents contain detailed invasion plans for 17 different species, including several current Council members. This goes far beyond the human situation. More voices joined the growing chorus of condemnation as delegates accessed the transmitted data and found their own species listed among potential future targets for Council military action. The political coalition that had made the Council's authority absolute for millennia began fragmenting as long suppressed fears about the organization's true intentions suddenly found concrete evidence to support them. This is all fabricated intelligence designed to undermine galactic unity. The Xanador broadcast desperately. Humans are a primitive species with limited technological capabilities. They could not possibly have access to genuine Council classified information. Admiral Chun's response came in the form of action rather than words. The Retribution's exotic weapon system engaged again, this time targeting the station's primary power core with surgical precision. Instead of destroying the entire facility, the weapon simply erased a critical component of the fusion containment system. causing a controlled shutdown that plunged half the station into darkness. Emergency lighting activated throughout the amphitheater, casting everything in harsh red illumination that made the chaos even more dramatic. Beings who had lived their entire lives in the security of Council protection suddenly found themselves experiencing genuine fear of an enemy that could reach through their greatest defenses to touch them, wherever they felt safest. That was a demonstration. Admiral Chun's voice cut through the emergency klaxons and panicked communications. The next shot removes your life support systems. The shot after that removes your gravity generators. I can keep this up until everyone on that station suffocates in the cold vacuum of space. Or you can release my daughter and surrender for trial. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater despite her injuries. Father, there are 2 million innocent beings on this station. Many of them had no knowledge of the genocide plans. Don't become the monster they claimed humanity already was. The communication channel fell silent for several seconds before Admiral Chun responded. Sarah, these beings stood by and cheered while they tortured you to death for trying to prevent the murder of billions. Their innocence expired the moment they decided your life was worth less than their political convenience. Then be better than them, Sarah replied. Show the galaxy what human justice actually looks like instead of giving them the war they expected us to start. Around the amphitheater, delegates who had been preparing for evacuation stopped to listen to this exchange between father and daughter. The human female who should have been dead was asking her, Father, to show mercy to the very beings who had been celebrating her execution. Moments before it was not the behavior they had expected from what their propaganda had characterized as a savage and unpredictable species. The narrative they had constructed about humanity's inherent violence was colliding with the reality of humans who chose mercy even in the face of ultimate provocation. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the confrontation unfold through the quantum broadcast networks that had originally been intended to show humanity's submission to galactic authority. What they witnessed instead was forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the young species that had appeared on the galactic stage less than a century ago on the water world of Aquatica Prime. The amphibious Nereid Council gathered in their great coral chambers to debate the implications of the intelligence data that continued flooding their communication networks. For generations, they had relied on the Galactic Council's protection from more aggressive species, trading their independence for security. Now they discovered that their protectors had been planning to harvest their ocean worlds for strategic resources, viewing the Nereids themselves as an expendable obstacle to efficient mining operations. The humans speak truth, declared Elder Tsunami, her voice carrying through the water-filled chambers with harmonic authority. We have been fools to trust those who would genocide children for political convenience. Similar conversations were taking place on thousands of worlds as species after species examined the transmitted intelligence data and found evidence of council plans that ranged from economic exploitation to outright extermination. The political unity that had made the Council's authority absolute for over a millennium was fracturing in real time as the true scope of their leaders' ambitions became clear on the Council station itself. The Xanador found himself facing a rebellion among his own delegate staff. Species that had been reliable Council supporters for centuries were demanding explanations for military plans they had never authorized. The Etherian delegation had formally withdrawn their support and was calling for immediate war crimes tribunals. Even the militant Vorthak were questioning whether the Council leadership had exceeded the authority granted to them by their member species. The intelligence is genuine, admitted General Krexthal of the Vorthak Military Command, his massive form hunched in defeat. I recognize my own strategic assessments in these documents. The humans somehow gained access to our most classified planning sessions. Admiral Chun's voice cut through the growing chaos with mechanical precision. We gained access because you underestimated us, just as you've underestimated every species you've conquered or destroyed over the past 1,000 years. The difference is that we learned from your mistakes while you remained arrogant enough to believe your own propaganda. Sarah remained standing on the execution platform, now free of her restraints but choosing to stay in place as a symbol of human restraint in the face of ultimate provocation. The molecular disruption device that should have killed her stood silent nearby, its energy field generators dark and cooling. Around her, Council security forces maintained their defensive positions while their commanders struggled to understand how their supposedly primitive enemy had achieved technological superiority. You speak of justice. Human, the Xenodor transmitted, his multiple eyes fixed on the viewports where the Retribution continued its impossible dance through space. But you threaten millions of innocent beings to save one individual. How is this different from the methods you condemn? The difference, Admiral Chun replied, is that I can actually save those millions of innocent beings by removing the corrupt leadership that has been planning their deaths. Your invasion plans don't stop with humanity, Prime. We've seen your long-term strategic assessments. Within 50 years, you plan to control or eliminate every independent species in this galaxy. The transmitted intelligence data supported this claim with horrifying clarity. Military documents outline systematic plans for the subjugation of dozens of species, complete with casualty estimates and resource allocation strategies. The Galactic Council that claimed to represent galactic unity and cooperation had been planning the largest genocidal campaign in known history. These plans were theoretical contingencies. Xenodor protested, though his voice carried diminishing conviction. Standard military preparedness that every responsible government maintains for potential future scenarios. Theoretical contingencies that included detailed casualty projections and resource exploitation assessments, Admiral Chun countered. Theoretical contingencies that had specific timelines and designated invasion fleets. Stop lying to yourself, Prime. You were caught planning mass murder, and the only reason you haven't already begun implementation is that humanity proved more difficult to eliminate than your models predicted. The political earthquake continued spreading as more species accessed the intelligence data and found their own worlds listed among the Council's future targets. Trade partners discovered they were marked for economic absorption. Military allies learned they were classified as potential threats requiring preemptive elimination. Even core worlds that have been loyal Council supporters for centuries found themselves designated for population reduction programs, disguised as environmental conservation efforts on the merchant world of Bazaar Station. The Traders' Collective Emergency Assembly convened in an unprecedented session. Their species had built their entire civilization around facilitating commerce between different galactic cultures, maintaining strict neutrality in political conflicts for over 8 centuries. The discovery that the Council planned to nationalize their trade networks and reduce their population to a more manageable level shattered their faith in the galactic order they had helped create. We withdraw our economic support from all Council operations, declared Trademaster. Profit before honor? His mechanical translation system struggling to convey the depth of his species' betrayal. Any organization that would plan genocide against its own members has forfeited the right to our cooperation. Similar declarations were flooding the communication networks as species after species withdrew their support from the Council that had betrayed their trust. The economic and political foundations of galactic civilization were crumbling as the truth about their government's intentions spread beyond the ability of any propaganda campaign to counter. Sarah watched the political collapse unfold through the amphitheater's communication displays with growing amazement. Her attempt to warn humanity about a planned invasion had accidentally triggered the complete exposure of the Council's genocidal agenda against dozens of species. The execution that should have silenced her had instead amplified her message beyond anything she could have achieved through normal diplomatic channels. Father, she transmitted through the quantum communication system that connected her to his ship. "I think we've made our point. The galaxy is listening now. Maybe it's time to focus on building something better instead of just tearing down what exists." Admiral Chun's response came after a long pause, suggesting he was consulting with his staff about the rapidly evolving political situation. "Sarah, the intelligence data indicates that Council military forces are already positioning for the invasion of human space. We can't simply walk away and hope that diplomatic pressure will stop a military campaign that's already in motion." The truth of this assessment was confirmed by emergency military communications that Council officers were trying unsuccessfully to encrypt fleet movements that had been disguised as routine patrol rotations were revealed to be invasion forces moving toward human territory. The discovery that their genocide plans had been exposed was causing Council military commanders to accelerate their timeline rather than abandon their objectives. "Then give them a choice," Sarah suggested. "Stand down the invasion fleets and submit to international war crimes tribunals, or face the consequences of continuing this path. But make sure the choice is clear and public so the galaxy can see that we offered them a way out." The suggestion carried wisdom that Admiral Chun recognized even in his anger over his daughter's treatment. Humanity's long-term survival in a hostile galaxy would depend as much on winning the moral high ground as on demonstrating military superiority. The species watching this confrontation needed to see humans as protectors rather than conquerors. "Very well," Admiral Chun transmitted on all frequencies, ensuring that every being in the galaxy would hear his words. "The Galactic Council has 60 seconds to order the immediate withdrawal of all military forces from positions threatening human space and to surrender designated war criminals for trial by an independent tribunal. Compliance will result in a negotiated settlement that protects the rights of all species. Non-compliance will result in the systematic destruction of all Council military assets and the hunting down of everyone responsible for planning genocide." The ultimatum hung in space like a sword over the galaxy's future, forcing every being to choose between the corrupt authority they had known for 1,000 years and the uncertain promise of justice offered by a species they had dismissed as insignificant primitives just hours before. The 60 seconds that Admiral Chun had given the Galactic Council stretched like an eternity across the communications networks of known space. On 10,000 worlds, beings who had never questioned the authority of their galactic government found themselves holding their breath as they waited to see whether their leaders would choose wisdom or catastrophic war. In the Council's emergency command center deep within the station, military commanders and political leaders engaged in frantic debate while their countdown timer displayed the remaining seconds until humanity's ultimatum expired. General Krexthal of the Vortex stood over a holographic display showing the positions of Council fleets throughout the galaxy, his massive hands clenched in frustration as he struggled with strategic realities that no amount of military training had prepared him to handle. "Our invasion fleets are already in position," he reported to the assembled Council members. "We have 47 heavy cruisers and over 300 support vessels positioned along the human border. Even if this single human ship possesses advanced technology, it cannot engage an entire fleet." Council Prime Vexonador's multiple eyes studied the tactical displays with growing unease. The intelligence data that humanity had transmitted contained frighteningly accurate assessments of Council military capabilities, suggesting surveillance operations that had been running for years without detection. If humans possessed such detailed knowledge of Council assets, it was possible they had prepared countermeasures that would make traditional military calculations irrelevant. "What are the projected casualties for a full military engagement?" he asked, though he suspected he would not like the answer. "Unknown," General Krexthal admitted reluctantly. "The human vessel demonstrated technology that we cannot counter with conventional weapons. If they possess a fleet of similar ships, our standard tactical doctrine becomes meaningless. On the execution platform, Sarah Chun watched the debate unfold through security monitors that her father's ship had apparently hacked to provide her with real-time intelligence. The molecular disruptor that should have killed her stood silent nearby, its control systems dark after being overridden by technology that the Council's engineers could not even understand, let alone counteract, around her. The amphitheater continued its descent into chaos as delegates from across the galaxy processed the implications of the transmitted intelligence data. Species that had trusted the Council for generations were discovering that their government had been planning their destruction while publicly claiming to protect their interests. The crystalline, Etherian delegate approached the platform where Sarah stood, her harmonic voice carrying the moral authority of a species renowned for their ethical principles. Young human, your people have given us evidence of crimes that demand justice. But justice requires courts and laws, not the threat of annihilation. How do we know that your species will be more trustworthy rulers than those you seek to replace? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. We don't want to rule anyone, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's amplification systems. Humanity spent our entire history fighting against rulers who believed they knew what was best for everyone else. We want a galaxy where each species controls their own destiny without fear of genocide from their neighbors. Pretty words, interjected the Vorthic military representative, his scarred features twisted in skepticism. But your father threatens to destroy our entire civilization if we refuse his demands. How is this different from the conquest you claim to oppose? Because my father is offering you a choice, Sarah replied. Surrender the war criminals who plan genocide and agree to a new system of galactic governance based on consent rather than coercion. Or continue on your current path and face the consequences of choosing mass murder over justice. The difference is that we're giving you the option to do the right thing. The communication channel crackled as Admiral Chun's voice cut through the debate with mechanical precision. 30 seconds remaining. I'm detecting movement among your invasion fleets. Any attempt to advance on human positions before this ultimatum expires will be considered an act of war. In the Council's command center, emergency alerts flashed as long-range sensors detected impossible readings near their fleet positions. Human ships that had been hidden somehow beyond the reach of their surveillance networks were revealing themselves throughout Council space, surrounding military assets with vessels that matched the technological capabilities demonstrated by Admiral Chun's flagship. Sir, reported the sensor operations officer, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, we're detecting at least 37 vessels with similar energy signatures to the human flagship. They've achieved positions around our major fleet concentrations without being detected by any of our monitoring systems. General Krexthal stared at the tactical display in disbelief. If the readings were accurate, humanity possessed a fleet of advanced warships that had been operating in Council space for months or possibly years without being detected. The strategic implications were staggering. Every major Council military installation was potentially vulnerable to attack by weapons they could not track or counter. How is this possible? The Xanador demanded. Our intelligence services reported that humanity possessed fewer than 50 interstellar vessels total. Most of them converted civilian transports with minimal military capability. Our intelligence services reported what the humans wanted them to see, General Krexthal replied grimly. We've been played from the beginning. They've been preparing for this war while we wasted time planning their extermination. The tactical situation that was developing painted a clear picture of humanity's true capabilities. Instead of the desperate resistance that Council military planners had expected from a primitive species facing extinction, they were confronting a sophisticated opponent that had been preparing for galactic conflict while carefully concealing their true strength. 10 seconds, Admiral Chun announced. I'm transmitting the coordinates where you can send representatives to discuss surrender terms. Choose quickly because my patience is exhausted, and my daughter has been through enough trauma for one day. The countdown reached 0 as Council leaders struggled with a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. They could surrender and face justice for their planned genocide, or they could fight a war against an enemy that had already demonstrated technological superiority and tactical preparation that made victory unlikely. Vexanador made his decision with seconds to spare. All council fleets maintain defensive positions only. Do not advance on human territory. Do not engage human vessels unless directly attacked. He paused, his multiple eyes focusing on the communication display. Admiral Chun, the Council accepts your terms for negotiation. We will send representatives to discuss a peaceful resolution to this crisis. The announcement sent waves of relief through the amphitheater as beings who had been preparing for galactic war realized they might live to see another day. But Admiral Chen's response carried a warning that suggested the crisis was far from over. The negotiation is not between the Council and humanity, he corrected. The negotiation is between the war criminals who planned genocide and the species they intended to murder. Humanity will participate as one voice among many, not as conquerors dictating terms to the conquered. Sarah felt a surge of pride at her father's words. Despite possessing the military advantage that could have made humanity the new galactic hegemon, he was choosing to build a coalition of equals rather than replace one tyrannical system with another. It was the kind of moral choice that she hoped would define her species' role in galactic affairs. The old Galactic Council is dissolved as of this moment, Admiral Chun continued. A new provisional government will be established with representatives from all species, including those who were targeted for elimination by the previous regime. Justice will be served, but it will be justice determined by the victims rather than imposed by the victors. The political revolution that Sarah had accidentally triggered, with her attempt to warn her people, was reshaping the galaxy in ways she had never imagined possible. The execution that should have silenced her had instead given voice to billions of beings who had lived under the threat of genocide without even realizing it. 3 weeks after the confrontation at the Council Station, the galaxy found itself in the midst of the most significant political transformation in recorded history. The Provisional Assembly that had replaced the Galactic Council met in rotating sessions across different worlds, ensuring that no single species could claim dominance over the new governmental structure that was slowly taking shape. Sarah Shun stood before the medical rehabilitation unit on the human colony ship Endeavour, watching her nervous system slowly repair itself from the damage caused by the molecular disruptor. The exotic technology that had nearly killed her had left permanent scars in her neural pathways, but human medical advances were proving capable of addressing damage that would have been considered irreversible just months earlier. The sensation should return to your extremities gradually over the next few weeks, reported Dr. Martinez, her voice carrying the professional optimism that all medical officers cultivated when dealing with experimental treatments. The alien technology you were exposed to operates on principles we're still learning to understand, but our neural regeneration protocols are adapting well to the challenge. Through the medical bay's viewports, Sarah could see the massive construction project that had transformed empty space near the human colony of New Geneva into the galaxy's new political center. Ships from dozens of species worked together to build a space station, designed according to architectural principles that accommodated the physical needs of every known sapient species. The Etherian delegation had insisted on crystal resonance chambers for their silicon-based physiology. The aquatic nereids required water-filled sections with specific mineral contents that matched their homeworld conditions. The energy-based photonic collective needed specialized containment fields that could sustain their electromagnetic life forms. Building a structure that could house such diversity had required unprecedented cooperation between species that had rarely interacted beyond formal diplomatic protocols. Admiral Chun entered the medical bay still wearing the dress uniform he had donned for that morning's war crimes tribunal. 3 weeks of testimony had established a clear record of the former council's genocidal intentions, but the process of determining appropriate justice remained contentious among species with very different cultural approaches to punishment and rehabilitation. How are the negotiations proceeding? Sarah asked, noting the tension in her father's expression. Command responsibilities that had once focused on protecting a single species had expanded to helping coordinate the political transformation of an entire galaxy, a burden that would have challenged anyone regardless of their military experience. Slowly, Marcus admitted, settling into the chair beside her rehabilitation unit. The Vorthak want public executions for everyone involved in planning the genocide. The Etherians prefer rehabilitation and restorative justice. The Traders Collective is focused on economic reparations. Getting consensus among 47 different species with 47 different judicial philosophies is proving almost as difficult as the original military confrontation. The complexity of the situation was reflected in the ongoing debates that filled the communication networks with arguments between species that had never been required to consider each other's perspectives before. The former Galactic Council had imposed unity through authoritarian control, suppressing the natural diversity of approaches that emerged when different cultures were free to express their values without fear of retaliation. What about the former council leadership? Sarah inquired, knowing that Vexanor and his inner circle remained in custody aboard the human fleet while the various species argued about their ultimate fate. Still arguing about jurisdiction, Marcus replied with evident frustration. Everyone agrees they're guilty of planning genocide, but nobody can agree on which legal system should prosecute them. The humans want them tried under our war crimes statutes. The Etherians insist on their restorative justice protocols. The Vorthak demand traditional combat trials that would basically be elaborate executions. The political complications were further complicated by the discovery that many species had their own candidates for the war crimes tribunals. Investigation of the transmitted intelligence data had revealed collaboration networks that extended far beyond the Council's inner circle. Military officers who had prepared invasion plans, civilian administrators who had calculated resource extraction quotas, even scientists who had developed biological weapons specifically designed to target particular species' physiologies. Maybe the solution isn't choosing one system, Sarah suggested, her experience as a diplomatic aide providing insights that pure military thinking might miss. Maybe each species gets to decide how to handle their own people who collaborated with the genocide plans, while the main council leadership faces a truly international tribunal that combines elements from multiple judicial traditions. Marcus considered this suggestion with the tactical mindset that had made him an effective military commander. Distributed justice with centralized coordination for the primary criminals. It could work, but it would require unprecedented cooperation between legal systems that have never been required to work together before. The communication panel in the medical bay activated, with an incoming message from the Provisional Assembly. The holographic display showed the Etherian delegate, her crystalline features reflecting the complex harmonics that her species used to convey emotional nuance in their communications. Admiral Chun, we require human input on the military security arrangements for the new governmental structure. The question has arisen of whether humanity intends to maintain military hegemony over the galactic community or if you are prepared to participate in a truly collective defense organization. The question struck at the heart of the challenge. Facing the new galactic order, humanity's technological advantages had made their military intervention decisive in stopping the planned genocide. But those same advantages raised legitimate concerns about whether they would become the new galactic hegemon. Species that had just escaped from authoritarian control were naturally suspicious of any arrangement that might recreate similar power imbalances under different management. Will participate in a collective defense organization. Marcus replied after a moment's consideration, but we won't disarm while former Council loyalists still control significant military assets throughout the galaxy. Security arrangements need to account for the reality that this transition isn't complete yet. Sarah watched her father navigate the political complexities that had emerged from their military victory. The easy part had been demonstrating humanity's ability to protect themselves and their allies from genocidal aggression. The difficult part was building a sustainable political system that could prevent future genocides, while respecting the autonomy of dozens of species with fundamentally different approaches to governance and justice. There's something else we need to discuss, the Etherian delegate continued, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of concern. Our archaeological specialists have been analyzing the technology that your species recovered from the derelict vessel. The original builders appear to have been engaged in a conflict with an enemy that possessed capabilities similar to those demonstrated by your current fleet. The implications hit Sarah immediately. The advanced technology that had given humanity their decisive advantage had come from a species that had apparently been destroyed, despite possessing weapons capable of altering fundamental physical constants. If their technology had not been sufficient to ensure their survival, humanity might be facing threats that had not yet revealed themselves. Do we know what happened to them? Marcus asked, his tactical instincts immediately focusing on the potential security implications. The derelict ship's computer cores were heavily damaged, but we've recovered fragments of historical records, the Etherian delegate replied. It appears they were fighting something they referred to as the Devourers, entities that consumed entire civilizations for resources we cannot identify from the available data. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her medical condition. Humanity had spent 3 years learning to understand and replicate technology from a species that had apparently been exterminated by an enemy powerful enough to overcome weapons that could erase matter from existence. The political transformation of the galaxy might have been only the first phase of a conflict that stretched across time, scales, and technological capabilities beyond current comprehension. How long ago did this war take place? She asked, though she suspected she would not like the answer. Based on stellar drift analysis and radioactive decay patterns, approximately 50,000 years ago, the delegate replied. But, Admiral, there are indications in the recovered data that suggest this conflict was cyclical rather than a single event. The Devourers may return on a regular basis to harvest advanced civilizations. Once they reach sufficient technological development, the revelation transformed their victory over the Galactic Council from an endpoint into a beginning. Humanity had stumbled into possession of technology that marked them as potential targets for an enemy that had been systematically harvesting galactic civilizations for millennia. 6 months after the dissolution of the Galactic Council, the newly formed Galactic Alliance faced its first real test not from internal political disputes, but from the growing evidence that their predecessors' greatest failure had been ignorance of threats that existed beyond the boundaries of known space. The Archaeological Research Station, orbiting the dead system where humanity had first discovered the ancient derelict vessel, buzzed with activity as scientists from dozens of species worked together to unlock the secrets of technology that had been old when their civilizations were still confined to single planets. Dr. Sarah Chun, now serving as the Alliance's Director of Xenoarchaeological Research despite her lack of formal training in the field, supervised teams that represented the greatest concentration of scientific expertise in galactic history. The pattern is becoming clear, reported Dr. Synthesis of Knowledge, the lead Etherian archaeologist whose crystalline form pulsed with excitement as data streams flowed through her consciousness. We found evidence of this harvest cycle in 17 different locations across the galaxy. Advanced civilizations develop faster than light travel, reach a certain threshold of technological capability, and then vanish completely within a span of decades. The evidence was mounting from multiple sources. Ancient ruins on worlds that had been dead for millennia showed signs of sudden abandonment by species that had achieved technological levels comparable to the current galactic community. Deep space surveys were discovering the remains of massive battles fought with weapons that made current. Military technology seemed primitive by comparison. Most disturbing of all, the pattern suggested a systematic harvesting operation that had been repeating for millions of years. Admiral Marcus Chun studied the holographic displays that showed the galactic map with overlay patterns indicating the locations and approximate dates of previous harvest events. His military mind immediately recognized the strategic implications of an enemy that had been refining their tactics across geological time periods while accumulating the technological achievements of every civilization they had destroyed. The timing concerns me, he said to the assembled research team. Based on the pattern analysis, the current galactic community should have triggered another harvest cycle approximately 2,000 years ago. The fact that the Devourers haven't arrived yet suggests either a change in their operational parameters or the possibility that they're already here and operating covertly. Sarah felt her partially healed nervous system respond to stress with familiar tremors as the implications of her father's analysis sank in. The molecular disruptor that had nearly killed her 6 months ago seemed like a trivial threat compared to entities that had been systematically harvesting galactic civilizations since before complex life had evolved on Earth. There is another possibility, interjected Scholar Prime Vexhala of the Zephyrian Research Collective, her insectoid features rigid with concern. The derelict vessel that provided humanity with their advanced technology may have been a trap or a monitoring device. By reverse engineering that technology, your species may have inadvertently announced to the Devourers that this galaxy has reached harvestable status. The research chamber fell silent as the assembled scientists contemplated this possibility. Humanity's technological breakthrough that had saved them from the Galactic Council's planned genocide might have simultaneously marked the entire galaxy for destruction by entities that made the Council's military capabilities seem insignificant by comparison. We need to accelerate our defensive preparations, Marcus declared, shifting into the strategic planning mode that had served him throughout his military career. If the Devourers operate on the timeline patterns we've observed, we have perhaps decades to prepare for a conflict that destroyed every previous galactic civilization. The challenge of coordinating defensive preparations across dozens of species with different technological capabilities and military traditions was proving almost as difficult as the original political transformation that had created the Alliance. The Vorthak wanted to build massive fortress worlds armed with the most destructive weapons their science could produce. The Etherians preferred mobile defense networks that could adapt to unknown enemy capabilities. The Nereids insisted on underwater bunker systems that could survive planetary bombardment. We can't just prepare for war, Sarah argued, her diplomatic experience providing a perspective that military thinking might overlook. We need to understand why the Devourers harvest advanced civilizations. If this is about resource extraction, maybe there's a way to negotiate. If it's about preventing potential threats, maybe we can demonstrate that we're not a danger to them. Dr. Synthesis of Knowledge's crystalline form flickered with the harmonic frequencies that indicated deep contemplation among her species. The recovered data fragments suggest that the Devourers are not biological entities in any sense we understand. They appear to be artificial intelligences or constructs that view galactic civilizations as temporarily useful arrangements of matter and energy that should be recycled when they reach optimal harvesting conditions. The revelation that they might be facing artificial intelligences rather than a biological species added new dimensions to the strategic challenge. Entities that had been operating for millions of years would possess accumulated knowledge and technological capabilities that no biological civilization could match through normal development processes. They would know every strategy that previous galactic communities had attempted and would have developed. countermeasures for approaches that biological minds could conceive, then we need to think in ways that previous civilizations didn't, Sarah concluded, her mind already working on possibilities that transcended traditional military or diplomatic approaches. Every harvest cycle gave them new technology and strategic knowledge from the civilizations they destroyed. But it also meant they never faced sustained opposition from a unified galactic community that survived their initial attack. Admiral Chun looked at his daughter with growing recognition of the insight she was developing. You're suggesting that our unity might be the variable that changes the equation. Previous civilizations were harvested individually or in small groups. We're the first galactic community that might face them as a truly unified force. The concept carried both hope and tremendous responsibility. If Sarah's analysis was correct, the Alliance represented not just the political evolution of their own galaxy, but potentially the first real chance that any galactic civilization had ever possessed to break the harvest cycle that had been repeating for millions of years. We need to prepare for 3 possibilities simultaneously, Sarah continued, her strategic thinking drawing on both diplomatic and military perspectives. First, that we can negotiate or find some way to coexist with the Devourers. Second, that we can fight them successfully using unified galactic resources. Third, that we can survive their initial attack long enough to learn how to defeat them through prolonged resistance. The research teams began developing plans that would address each possibility while maintaining the political unity that made such comprehensive preparation feasible. Species that had been preparing for war against each other were now coordinating to face a threat that made their previous conflicts seem like minor disagreements between allies. As the months passed and the defensive preparations intensified, long-range sensors began detecting anomalies at the edges of known space. Objects moving at impossible speeds, energy signatures that matched no known technology, gravitational disturbances that suggested massive constructs accelerating toward the galactic core. The harvest cycle that had claimed countless civilizations across millions of years was beginning again. But this time the Devourers would face something they had never encountered before, a galaxy that was ready for them. Sarah stood in the command center of the new Alliance defense station, watching the sensor displays that showed their enemy finally revealing themselves after eons of patient waiting. The execution that should have silenced her voice had instead awakened a galaxy to dangers that threatened every species with extinction. Now they would discover whether unity and preparation could overcome an enemy that had never known defeat. The greatest test of humanity's place in the galaxy was about to begin, and the outcome would determine not just their survival, but the survival of every sapient species that would ever evolve in the cosmos. The galaxy had learned to speak with one voice. Soon they would learn if that voice was strong enough to say no to forces that had been harvesting civilizations, since before the first stars had formed the heavy elements necessary for life itself.